Welcome to episode 3 of the Liberty Itch podcast. My guest today is Jim Willmott. Jim is a scientist, farmer, decorated public servant, fellow Liberty Itch writer, and soon-to-be Libertarian Party senator, all going well. For years, Jim has been at the front line in the unfortunately losing battle against government for the property rights of regular Australians. In this episode, Jim told me about what is actually happening with the so-called green energy projects in rural Australia, along with many other fascinating stories of past, present and future battles with a government whose actions seem to be increasingly misdirected, destructive and authoritarian. Mr. Jim Willmott, thank you very much for coming on the Liberty Itch podcast. It's a pleasure to have you, sir.
No, hey, Damon, thanks for having me, mate. It's I'm looking forward to tonight. It's going to be great.
Likewise. Yeah, likewise, mate. Likewise. Now, you've just done a run for the Senate in Queensland with the Libertarian Party. Mm-hmm. So can you please give a little bit more of a background to that story, when and how you joined the Libertarians and how it's gotten all the way to actually running for Senate?
Well, I guess I've been interested in the Libertarians for a number of years now. They were called the Liberal Democrats, but mostly because of their, I guess, right. Libertarians are really, forthright about protecting people's property rights. And I've been involved with an organisation, chairing an organisation called Property Rights Australia, and we're all about protecting people's property rights, whether you live in the city, on a big sprawling station, or a small farm in between. So I think it was a good match, and joined the Libertarians, went to a few of their functions and got tapped on the shoulder. Would I be interested in running in the next federal election in the capacity as a Senate candidate, lead Senate candidate? So, I thought it was great. Wow. And there's things that need to happen at a federal level that are affecting our property rights. So, yeah, I was all in, mate, boots and all.
Understood, yeah. Now, you were heading up, or you're still heading up in some capacity, Property Rights Australia, PRA.
Look, I'm still an active board member. I still contribute to the direction. I've just had to step down as chair while I'm in my Senate run. So,
okay. Understandably, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, still very active and still doing, I'm still involved at a grassroots level, helping individuals and communities out with their property rights every day.
What does that look like? What are you fighting against, and how do you actively go about actually doing this? Because obviously It's going to relate to how other people might want to fight for their own property rights.
Yeah, definitely. Look, we still do a lot of submissions to different legislation or strategies, policy put out by a number of government agencies that we think affect our everyday property rights, the right to use your land or natural resources, to the right to develop your land, and also land being taken off people for different infrastructure. One of the key things that I guess I've been doing outside of property rights is also helping communities that are being steamrolled with this reckless renewable rollout that's come from a federal level through to a state level. And, communities are very well being fragmented, farmlands being covered up with a lot of these industrial renewables, and there's a massive hits to a lot of environmental values that like country and regional people hold dear. So it's about supporting them. There's been, since this reckless rollout of renewables has been going on over the last 2 years, there's been 135 different action groups, Damien, start up around Australia. So we've been helping
135 action groups in favour or fighting against?
No, totally against, mate, because they can see it's like this. The picture is that you've got government at a state and federal level subsidising the rollout and the mass rollout of industrialised solar and wind, battery energy storage systems and transmission lines on rural and regional lands throughout the key states down the eastern seaboard of Australia. They call it the national energy grid or market. And to put it in perspective,
sorry to interrupt, but they're literally taking quality fertile farmland and covering it in this ugly, unsightly, ineffective crap.
That is exactly what is happening. Look, they're not
It's appalling.
they're not compulsorily acquiring it yet, but they are like you've got a landowner that he makes some money out of it, but it's all the edge effects because if you've got a big solar factory, and I hate calling them farms, they're factories, mate, and there's all the surrounding neighbours and the whole community. We think is worse off because it decreases property values, it ruins the amenity of the landscape, and of course it covers up. You don't get any food out of a solar factory covered in solar panels, mate. So all you get is potential.
It also seems it also seems to be remarkably environmentally destructive from a layperson's point of view. Looking from the outside, you're taking the fertile lands that have been feeding the nation for decades, and you're covering it in glass panels and these giant windmills.
Well,
it's insanity.
It is insanity. When you look at the windmills, like there's like they're blowing the tops of the Great Dividing Range in Queensland and siting these big wind turbines. These wind turbines are 200 metres high to the top of the tower where the hub is, where the blades connect into. And then you've got 3 100-metre blades spinning. So that circumference, that diameter is 5 football fields. And so that's huge. And they want to put 21,000 of these towers on land throughout the eastern seaboard of Australia. And so remember, like if you look back, well, we think, you could value these at about $3 to $4 million minimum each, because that's what some have sold for in the past when government has bought it from a private company. So we've worked it out.
Tens of billions of dollars.
Billions of billions of dollars, mate. Look, the blades only roughly last 10 years in Australia, and the whole thing's only lasted about 25 years. So, and they're very inefficient. Like, of course, they put them up the top of the ranges, and remember they're blasting the tops of these ranges out, and they're actually, you've got to get these big 400-ton cranes up to the top to build these things, all excavators. They've got to push in massive access tracks. There's literally thousands and thousands of kilometres of access tracks that they're pushing through these ranges. And remember, the ranges are where the highest biodiversity value is in Queensland and the other states.
Yeah.
That's where all the koalas and soft and furries are hanging out, mate, because they said, oh, well, it hasn't been cleared for agricultural industry. And then along comes the wind factories.
No purpose.
Yeah, that's right. So only now are we starting to discover the real impacts that this is having on our high biodiversity value. So we just can't, and a lot of the communities can't get their head around where, like me, as a beef producer here in southern Queensland, I've got a whole host of legislation at a local, state and federal level where I've got to look after the environment, and so I should. I've got to be careful of runoff and erosion. I can't clear land that's on too steep a country, all these different things that regulate how I look after the natural resources on my lands. But wind and solar, they get exemptions from all this. They get exemptions from all these different regulations. And so that's why they're allowed to blow the tops of mountains. Yeah, it is a joke. We're destroying the environment to somehow save it from boiling to death, which is crazy. So that's what's happening. So we've really been helping the communities to formulate action groups to really fight back against this insanity, and that's sending submissions away. It's holding rallies. Look, 3 weeks ago we had a rally at a person's property. Get this, she came home to her property. She doesn't live there, but it's their retirement, a young family with 2 kids, and there was their front fence was cut. A bulldozer came in and pushed a track through all her timber, through her land, out to her back fence, and totally cleared her 9 metres her side of the fence and took her fence away. And they put this big prison fence up. It's true, not even calling her, not even ringing her. She knew nothing.
No warning, no letter or nothing.
No warning. This is a foreign company. Yeah, this is a foreign. I can even name them. They're called GPG. They're from Spain, and crazy. So look, they didn't end up. The fence was in the wrong location. It didn't follow the DA anyway, let alone they didn't communicate with her. We said, move the fence or we're going to rally. They didn't move the fence, so we rallied there, and we had about 70 people. It was raining, it was flooding. They came there, and we pulled the fence down, Dana, as a show of the. So we had, and this is what, you know what it's like, lifted a cloak, because communities have been running scared about this. They feel pressured by these companies because they're all backed by government corporations and government with our money. And so people are starting to stand up against this tyranny. Like to
but
me.
Can you? I mean, what are the repercussions? I mean, doesn't the sheriff come to town, or God knows what else, or they sue or do something else? Because I mean, the government seems to be, in many Western countries, just out of control when it comes to this stuff.
It's funny, isn't it, that like if I went and cleared a fence line and didn't get permission, it was through trees, like I would be in jail. But these guys are allowed to go through, push a track through someone's property without even telling them, knock down their back fence and put up a prison fence in the wrong location.
But I mean, you should be getting government. I don't believe in government, but it's these people should be sued to oblivion for doing that, you know, way beyond just the, you know, making good the property that they damaged themselves. This is outrageous. I know it's not an isolated event. This sort of stuff is happening a lot. It's just incredible to hear about a firsthand encounter.
Well, it is. They've actually said to this landowner, Michelle, saying, well, don't you make mistakes? And Michelle said, well, making a mistake is putting your shirt on back to front now. I know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Accidentally bulldozing somebody else's property. Yeah.
So this is one of the biggest issues, facing people's property rights right across the eastern seaboard of Australia and rural and regional areas at this moment. That's why you've got 135 different action groups, tens of thousands of people. So we've got people living in small towns, like there's a small town in New South Wales, 300 people. There's people that they're surrounded by wind turbines, 360 degrees, 3 kilometres from town, where they had a beautiful rural view before. And the only thing they got from it was a new footpath uptown. And there's people on the fringe of town that have to put doonas on their windows and pillows under their doors to get to sleep when the wind's blowing in the direction of town because of the noise from the wind turbines.
Because of the noise. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, they're noisy, aren't these things? Yeah.
They are noisy, and they have a lot of what they called infrasound, which is very low frequency noise. And so that can affect some people, can't affect. And what we're finding out now too from different researchers, a couple of universities have found that this low frequency noise, this low megahertz noise below 16 megahertz, where you and I can't hear it, but the animal kingdom can. And that's how a lot of the animal kingdom communicate, like koalas, for example, which are all up on top of these ranges that they're blowing the tops off, communicate at 4 megahertz. And so they're finding out now, either side of the wind turbines, 10 k's in front, 10 k's behind, the koalas can't communicate to their mates. G'day, Toby, come over. They can't, and so they're out of there. They're gone.
Wow.
So these are the things the government is rushing all this through, this whole renewable. See, apparently we're going to have 82% renewables in our power grid by 2030. That's what their dream is. And so documents have been put out, studies have been put out. It could cover either from 14 million hectares of land right up to 158 million hectares of land in the eastern seaboard of Australia is going to be covered with industrial renewables. So it's got a lot of impacts. And
it's insanity.
It is insanity, mate. Yeah, people need to realise what's happening here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've also looked a little bit into the windmill situation and the fact that they actually need to be connected to the grid to actually get the blades turning in the first place. So there's a minimum amount of wind necessary, but below which they're actually using more power than they produce. And then they only have a top speed, which is limited as well. So if it blows too hard or too soft, it's negative. in
That's
either
right.
direction. Either they're sucking up energy or they're breaking down.
Yep.
And so you've got this little band in between where it produces a pittance of energy only at certain, and this is the most, and particularly on a continent like Australia where you've got the wealth of cheap fuel to
Yes.
choose from your uranium to your coal to your oil to everything, and you're doing this crap and buying all of the stuff presumably from China, who you're trying to pick a fight with. By anyway, that's another matter. What can you do though?
That's right.
Like this seems to be a very deep rooted thing in government. What impact are you having, and can it be affected? Is anything happening?
Look, there has been some changes, not in policy intent from the current Labor government. They are looking at
Can't
some
imagine.
higher level of protection for communities, but it's really just window dressing, Damon.
I could
Because
imagine.
remember,
Yeah.
people in the cities aren't really seeing what's happened. They just think, look at the word renewables. When you hear renewables, I was at the dentist the other day and he said, "Jim, they're renewables. How can they be bad?" Because I was telling him about the birds, and I said, "Well, mate, because they think that there's no impact, and which there's huge impact, and it's about educating the people in the city and in the urban areas, and that's a big job, and we are doing that slowly, but it's about getting rural and regional communities to come together and unite, and I think that's really been powerful right across the eastern seaboard of Australia, particularly in Queensland. We've had a number of very active groups and community leaders that have come out. So then they've started to attach different things, like a lot of other things of property rights, government overreach, government not listening to their views. It's like we're stuck in a movie of the Hunger Games where you've got all these regional
Yeah.
sections, cities, like communes, feeding into the empire because it's the impact of having all these renewables out here. We're providing power to the city, mate. And so we're taking this hit on their behalf. So, some people are happy and said, well, this is what needs to happen on the altar of climate change. This is what needs to happen. We've got to have a bit of the hit to the environment. Your regional communities might have to have a bit of a hit. Mate, look, there's stories there where people have tried to commit suicide because they've joined an
Yeah.
action group. They've joined an action group because they found out they bought their forever home, and this guy with a young family, a disabled son, bought their forever home, and then the banker, the old guy next door, sold it to a banker. They built this big solar factory, and his property values dropped. This guy's young family, he protested. His family, his young daughter, got harassed by a number of pro-renewable activists, and they pulled sign down. They harassed his family, and it was just the pressure of it all. And living 300 metres from 700 hectares of black glass, they just had enough. So he eventually sold for like about 50% less than he'd bought it for 3 years prior. And he
Jesus.
came back just to pick up a few things before the whole deal went through. And he went to the gun cabinet in his house, and he sat on the front veranda overlooking the view that he once had, which was a beautiful rural view, now covered in black glass. And he put that gun to his head, and he was ready to do himself in. It was only that his disabled son had rung him from the Gold Coast and said, "Dad, when are you going? I'm coming home." That's the only thing that saved him. And so this is what's happening. He went across to his neighbours and told him, and luckily, yeah, it didn't happen. But this story is common. There's marriage breakups, there's relationship breakdowns. There is huge problems in rural and regional Australia from what this government is doing. And, I just find it disgusting. And that's what drives me, Damon, to help people
Oh,
because, yeah, it's disgusting.
so, but then getting back to what do you do? What actions and options do you have available to you to actually fight back against this
Well, we've held
authoritarian march?
yeah, no, definitely authoritarian. Look, we've held a number of rallies, and they've gone very well. And the conservative side of politics have come out, the coalition, Liberals and Nationals, have come out and put a policy forward where they want to go nuclear. They don't want to go coal, but they want to go nuclear now and have less renewables in the mix. But there's still 54% renewables, which is ridiculous. So that was a turnaround to get them to go that way. But they've still signed up to net zero by 2050, which, I think is ridiculous. So for an example, pulling that fence down a couple of weeks ago with those 70 people, we got national. We're on the front page, even with Donald Trump's inauguration. We were on the front pillar, and then we had Donald Trump. I thought it was pretty good, mate. You can't buy that, can you?
Well done. Yeah, that's
a big full-page story. So what that did is it made the state government here in Queensland step up and say, well, we're halting a number of wind projects to actually look at the impacts of communities. Again, a bit of window dressing, but it was pressure for them to react. And I think the communities now are learning you've got to stand up and you've got to do things like that, where people's property rights are being torn up before their eyes, knocked down before their eyes, and start making a stand. Sure, you can write submissions, go for it, and they're helpful as well. But I think there needs to be more communities standing up together, side by side, and against this out of control bureaucracy and this, I guess, climate change cult. Like even the true greenies, which used to strap themselves to the front of bulldozers, mate. We've only got one environmental group that's come on board throughout where all this is happening. The rest are so intermeshed with the climate change narrative, they're accepting that there will have to be some environmental, social and economic impact.
It's extraordinary.
It's like a crazy movie, and we're in the middle of it. So that again is what's driven me.
Idiocracy is the movie. Yeah, it's nuts.
It is to go into the Senate because energy. Look, renewables aren't going to do it for us. The capacity factor of when
they don't work.
They don't work. They're weak. Look, we're on the cusp of going from. We're from energy prosperity, where we used to have some of the cheapest energy in the world from coal fire.
Still do, just don't want to use it anymore.
That's right. We're sitting on it as we speak. To energy poverty, we're on the edge of that cliff, and once we start to fall, it's not something you can turn around easy. So
no, you're talking years, decades. Yeah,
we are.
And you need to look at Europe just for the this is the direction that you're heading. It's an absolute disaster, and
it is.
And they're just copying them.
And we're having blackouts now. When we have in Australia, as you would know, now they're panicking when we get over 35 degrees. Mate, 35 degree every day here in summer where I live, and it's been like that.
I lived in Queensland for 10 years. It's like, that's called summer.
Yeah, that's right. So you've got government saying now, well, don't put your clothes dryer on, don't run your air conditioner in the afternoon when you come home from work. Because, the power grid is, we haven't got enough power. So,
but buy an electric car because that's got to save the environment.
That's right. So when we all hook up with our electric cars, millions of them, how's the grid's going to handle that? So it's just ridiculous. And people are seeing now, to me, it's about baseload. And our baseload is at risk. Like, not only are we closing coal-fired power stations down, Damon, we're blowing them up. So even like Germany, at least they're just closing down and mothball them. Well, we're blowing ours up as like a show of defiance, just how evil these things are. So it's like internal terrorism. Can I say that?
And it is. I mean, well, if you define terrorism as attacking the civilians, then it actually is, isn't it? So your run for the Senate is hoping to go into the belly of the beast to actually take some of this crap on.
Definitely.
How is that progressing? I mean, what's your sense overall for the nation as to the attitude of the people toward this renewables nonsense?
I think in rural and regional areas, it's there's definite opposition, even though the government, non-government organisations that are in their pocket do surveys, Damien, saying, well, look, 80% of people living in rural and regional Australia are happy with it.
Yeah, yeah.
But you dig into that. Here's an example. You dig into it, and one was done by the CSIRO here in Australia, and they said, yeah, 80% of Australians are happy to live beside a big industrial renewable project. And we're at Property Rights Australia. We're going, I mean, this doesn't sound
Yeah,
right.
who the hell did you interview for that response?
Yeah,
Like 80% of the CSIRO employees?
yes.
Like,
So you get into it, and yeah, look, they did send it out to 6,000 people, and they gave them, that was in urban, rural, and regional areas. Not
mhm.
many of them, I think 5% were actually in the areas where renewables were, but they actually gave them a hypothetical question. So you imagine sitting in a city or a major regional town, which a provincial city, and reading a hypothetical question. Would you mind living next to a big solar farm? If it would help achieve our climate goals, would provide the community with money and jobs. Of course, you're going to say yes, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that sounds like a
It's a
great idea.
totally
Of course
loaded
I would.
question. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So, mate, it wasn't a true survey, was it? So we
No.
did our own survey across 800 people across those three key states down the eastern seaboard, and it came back at 95% were against it.
Opposed.
95% weren't happy with the way it was rolling out. People's mental and social and people's mental health was being affected,
Of
and
course it is.
and one of the key things, which is a real worrying, see, there's pressure because you've got state and federal governments have got these targets. We're going to have 82% by 2030 of renewables in the grid, and the states try to outdo each other. Well, we're going to have, 50% in 2 years, and it just escalates. So you've got all this pressure on the departments and the corporations and the developers to achieve these goals. But then you've got the community saying, well, no, we don't want this. You're just ruining our landscape. So, and you're ruining our lives. So what's happened is that there's been pressure. So people have started to fight back, and they've actually, like, we got heaps of donations, and we created this movement called Let's Rethink Renewables. And
Mhm.
that gave us a lot of money to put up these big billboards. And it was based, big billboards, website, some radio, and it was based all around these key pillars that were being affected. And the first pillar was it's it's ruining the farmland. Productive farmland that feeds us all. The next pillar is it's ruining rural landscapes, plastering solar panels and wind turbines on top of ranges, the amenity of the landscape, which is affecting tourism. It also affects people's mental health as well. It's destroying environmental values, and it's actually fracturing communities because there's big money. If you sign up to a wind turbine, you get $40,000 a year every year, and so the landowner who signs up, he's laughing, making all this money through the subsidies that we all pay, but his neighbours aren't, and the surrounding community isn't.
Yeah.
So it's
Is
only
that
the developer
40,000 per turbine?
per turbine, and some properties have 5 or 6 turbines on, so you can imagine. Some have 10, some have 20.
But am I right? I think I heard that they also need to part fund the actual installation of the turbines or the maintenance. They're responsible in some way. So I heard something about the deal that doesn't turn out well for the people who actually go for it necessarily, in that if the turbine breaks down, there's a hell of a cost to actually get it back up and running, and there's a contractual obligation to actually do so. Am I right? Or
Oh, definitely. Like there is pretty tight contracts where the land. The thing with the landowner is insurance for his property, but
right,
also with who takes the wind turbines down at the end of their life after
right,
20, 25 years. So there's not like in mining where you have to put rehabilitation bonds aside under law to make sure that there's funds there to rehabilitate. There's none of that. So a lot of these wind turbine farms are getting sold. The one from here, 50 k's from here, has been sold 5 times in about 6 years. So they just pass through different corporates. And so what's going to happen, and we think that's going to happen after 20, 25 years, They just have a $2 shell company there that, oh, well, we can't
Yeah,
afford
that's right.
it.
Dissolve the whole thing and just leave the wreckage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so some of these turbines, it's not just you can just monkey up to a top of a 200-meter tower with a monkey wrench.
Yeah, with a spanner. Yeah.
They're gonna take about $600,000 each to pull
Yeah.
down. So
Yeah. Especially, I mean, I'm just thinking, well, ordinarily it's difficult enough to take a log to your own property without getting permits from the government to do it. So I can imagine something as big as the fuselage of a
oh,
Boeing 747 would cost a fair penny to actually transport back out.
definitely. So just back onto those pillars, I just wanted to finish off that discussion.
Sorry, yeah.
Was yeah, you've got that environmental destruction. So you've got all these different. You've got the regional landscapes. You've got the farmland being covered with it basically being like an industrial pincushion. And at the end, and you've got the fracturing of regional communities because you have some people saying it's great for the community. You've got this guy that's going $40,000 a year. Now he can sit in the pub and watch the wind turbines turn, and he's just earning money. They put in a
Awesome
new
productivity.
yeah, but they don't do anything like there's no legacy project. There's no look. We've got bad, terrible hospital, terrible roads, not enough housing. We've got all these crime. They don't fix any of that. And
No.
really, what it takes, it kind of fragments and fractures the community where you've got people that were lifelong friends don't talk to each other anymore because
Yeah.
Tom signed up to the wind farm, but Harry hasn't. But both their daughters go to the netball association, and then they have arguments there. Or there's some towns that don't now no longer have enough people, enough volunteers to man their rural fire brigade because there's that much separation and fragmentation. So you can see it's an evil thing. It's an evil thing. So with all those pillars, what it's doing to rural and regional Australia, it is destroying our way of life. And we're saying to people, once those key pillars have gone, once this has all happened, you can't get it back again, Damon. Once
No.
it's gone, it's
Yeah.
gone for good, mate. It's
Yeah.
destroyed.
It's taken
Ah,
generations to build it. You destroy it in
yeah.
one and it's gone. Yeah. You
And look
start
at the
again.
food that we produce. These regional communities and rural communities, they're like an ecosystem. They produce food. They help each other. It's like that story I wrote about where eagles fly. It's about
Hmm.
the mateship. It's about the unity. It's about helping each other out. This is breaking that. This is breaking that down, and this is one of the real perverse outcomes of this. Not only do we get unreliable, intermittent, weak power that's going to send us over an energy cliff. We're actually
Yeah.
destroying
We
these
destroy the
regional and
environment and the communities and the food production, and it's just all negatives. It just doesn't. But
there's no positives, mate. I
there's
can't
no
see a positive.
positives.
No,
No.
it's
But this is
destruction.
coming
So
from an imported ideology. This.
it is.
So the just like COVID, none of these ideas are domestically grown. They're all imported. The way they go about actually imposing these things upon the communities, etc., etc. How do you fight back? Have you come into contact with that, where that's coming from, and how you actually do anything to affect it? I mean, it's existential. It needs to be fixed, and
Definitely.
you're
Well,
one of the ones fighting for this. So
that's right. Like we put, like in the local, we've recently gone through a local government election cycle through a number of states, and we've pushed hard. And local governments, some have really stood up and said, we don't like what's happening to our communities because they're on the front line. They
yeah,
clock. Even our local governments find out about projects in the paper. They don't even get a look in. I know it's just ridiculous, and so that some of them have stepped up. Some of them have gone after the money because it's big money being promised, all the bells and whistles. So they've gone and just thrown a lot of rural people under the bus. Can I
yeah,
say that?
yeah,
But then the state government and the federal government, it's all tied to the Paris Climate Change Accord. So we've been crossing our fingers. So many people have now. Trump's got in, signed, throwing out the Paris climate agreement accord, and here we are in Australia where we've got Labor on one side saying, "Oh no, we've still got to go ahead, but this is important." Look at the fires. Look, we're going to boil to death, and we've even got our Conservative opposition saying, "Well, no, we're still abiding by the climate. It's very, very important. Even though the biggest economy in the world has said it's a load of rubbish, we're pulling out. We're taking out all the subsidies for renewable and solar.
Yeah.
We're going nuclear. And nuclear is a great idea, sure. Like everyone wants to treat the environment better, Damon. They want to leave the environment. Yeah. We want less pollution. I'm happy to go nuclear, but we're going to need coal in the meantime, mate, to make sure we've got baseload and gas. You know, our gas, Australia is about to import gas because we haven't got enough gas. And we've got some of the biggest gas reserves in the world.
Yeah, just sitting on more than the rest of the world and import it.
Yeah, we've got some of the biggest
on boats to save the environment.
We're destroying the environment, mate. It drives my head in. It's crazy. So we are putting pressure in the election cycles. That's where I was going. We have in the local government, which has helped. We have in the state, and which have come up with some changes. This state coalition government here in Queensland, and now we're putting pressure in the federal cycle. Leading, because you know what it's like after the election cycle, politicians just go back and, well...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we got a few years now to sit back.
I wish I could do something for you, Jim.
Yeah.
So we lever it as much as we can. So that's what we're doing, and that's what we're going to keep doing, mate. So I've got a couple of protest rallies coming up, and I guess what that has helped our Senate run, the Libertarians, is that we were helping out multiple communities in New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria, but particularly in Queensland with renewables. So we've got a lot of rural and regional communities that now see me going across to the Libertarians and having that fight as well, have come with us and like the Libertarians. So, and think that Libertarians are one of the only parties standing up against this renewable madness. So that's helping build a momentum. So hopefully that momentum keeps rolling, mate, to the election day. But there's a lot more work.
Well, Canal, in my previous episode, touched on the Libertarian Party policies. Can you go into a little bit more depth about what they're looking to do in terms of renewables? Just remind the audience. Nothing.
Yeah, no, sure. Look, we've still got a nuclear ban federally in Australia, and there's a number of states that also have a nuclear ban. So we're all about lifting the ban and working with the states to lift the ban. So nuclear can come into the market, and we're also about ending all subsidies for renewables, because remember, we're paying about $16 billion a year, Damon, in subsidies to the renewable industry, and which is just an amazing amount of money to pay these foreign companies, and most of them are foreign, to build this crap all over our land. It's just ridiculous. So that's another key thing, and we're about protecting the environment and farmlands from these renewable projects. So if there is going to be any renewable projects, well, they're going to have social license. They're going to not be built in national parks. They're going to have to be built in places where there's minimal impact. And really, if renewables are put out there with no subsidies, they'll fall over, mate. How can you run a business where it only produces power? Solar runs at about, in the last 12 months, 19%, and wind's at 29%. Where you've got coal pumping out 100%, you've got nuclear close to 100%. So it's just crazy. So that's a big thing.
It can't function on its own merit at all.
No, it needs a massive life support system of gas backup, of pumped hydro, of battery energy storage systems to actually survive.
And perhaps a multi-trillion-dollar carbon credit trading platform somewhere overseas, perhaps.
And remember, every 25 years or even sooner, you've got to renew it.
Yeah.
And where's all that waste go, Damien? All the waste go. Where's it go?
We've already seen it. Either stays where it is or it goes in a hole in the ground and collects and contaminates even more.
So we want a free market. We want a free market, mate, where energy, different forms of energy can go into the market and survive on its own 2 feet. I do think, and some of the Libertarian Party, to get nuclear across the line, because it's going to be so legislatively heavy,
Yeah,
It
it's
is
going to
going to
be.
need some government support to get it up and get it working. So, uh,
I was
a
more
lot
thinking
of
it's going to take decades just to get through the actual
that's right.
bureaucracy. Like,
It is.
yeah,
So they're going to need a hand with that. You can't expect a private company to come in, which they have the expertise. The Koreans, South Koreans have already said, well, they'd be interested if we
yeah.
lifted the bans. But again, they're going to have a government partnership to actually get over the line. So if it's revenue neutral over so many years back to the public, we don't have it. We don't have a problem with that. But it's going to need a help up.
Is it absolutely necessary? Or do you think there's just so much sovereign risk in Australia that no one would be willing to put up the money because you just don't know what the next administration is going to do to change the rules on you halfway through?
Well, that's a really good point too. There would have to be bipartisan support of the two major parties to
Yeah.
allow a civil nuclear industry to proceed. Because you're right, who's going to come in for like a 3-year term and say, "Yeah, we're going to do it," and then the next thing, the other
You'd be out
side
of your
gets in,
mind.
where you go. So
Yeah.
that is a very good point, Damon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But the rural communities of Australia have been attacked. I mean, this is the latest affront on them, but it's been going on for quite some time, which is why you've been in this property rights game for quite a while. So, my understanding was that the Chinese have come in and bought a hell of a lot of farmland. I don't have the statistics off the top of my head. I don't know if you know where that's at.
Yeah, they have like.
But Australians are basically backing out, is what I'd say. The farmers are giving up, and the farmer friends that I've had, the same sort of thing. It's just it's hard enough to actually run a farm, let alone fight the government and the bureaucracy to get the job done. And they just, yeah.
Well, you're right. I think there's a big gap. Like in Queensland alone, like we have like nearly 30 years of socialist governments, and over
Yeah.
that time, the separation. We used to have good links with either side of government between country and city, but there's been a purposeful separation and fragmentation of that link, where a lot of the government ministers on the left side are taking advice from green activists, from international non-government organisations that want to get rid of farming and want to regulate farming to death to save the environment. So there's been a big push in trying to
Irony of
lay,
that statement. It's just sorry, just Jesus. Yeah, we
it's
need to get rid of farming to save the environment. Like what?
well, they're trying to brand us, and it has worked to a degree with a lot of people in inner city that live in this bubble. I'm not saying about the urban fringes and that, but I'm saying in the inner city that they do think a lot of the farming communities are environmental vandals. And what happens then? You've got a lot of the advisors to the government ministers work in the inner city, live in the inner
These
city.
people,
They
yeah.
develop policy in total isolation of rural and regional communities that takes away their rights to farm, that takes away their value of their farming asset and land without any compensation.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're feeding the population in the metropolitan areas. Well, we're doing this because farmers are wrecking the Great Barrier Reef. Farmers are killing koalas. This is what's happening. This is the narrative. Sensible land use that would have occurred 3 decades ago has been thrown out the door because the activists and the green ideology has taken hold in these repetitive socialist governments to a point where the policies coming out from these governments is actually doing more perverse environmental damage by focusing on things that aren't really going to impact or save the environment. Or, for example, let me talk about say vegetation management. So vegetation
Yeah,
management.
it's a good
So
topic in
that,
light of the LA fires right now.
yeah,
Vegetation
that's right.
management would go down very well over there.
Well, vegetation management. So previously, way back like 50, 60 years ago, to have a lease or to get freehold, the government said, well, you have to clear your land or we're going to take the lease off you. So clearing was undertaken. Too much clearing was undertaken. People cleared too much. But over that time, we've
Because
learned.
it was required to clear too much. Like that was the
Yeah, the Brigalow development scheme and all that. Clear, develop, production. So there wasn't any
mandated from government.
mandated from government, mate. You lose your lease if you didn't clear. That's what people don't understand, that
No, yeah.
landowners were forced to clear, and that created a culture that we must clear. And
Well, you'd
so
build it into your processes, wouldn't you? That's just
we do. Yeah.
yeah.
So we've learnt, and so like Australian
Sorry,
farmers, some of the best.
what was that also based on? That was the best of intentions to prevent fires, or was that something
No,
else?
that was the best of intentions to clear as much scrub as you can and plant as much crop as you can and run as many cattle as you can, but not in balance with the environment. So,
But who? Why would the government be mandating that? Like, I would have assumed that the farmers would be the best people to know how to run their land, and it's in their vested. They've got a vested interest in making it as
yeah.
productive as they possibly could, but within the realms of sustainability.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't sustainable. I'm talking back like 50, 60 years ago, where we still had large tracts of Queensland that were totally undeveloped. And
Right. Okay.
we could see that there was potential there for development, and the government had these big development schemes to clear as much land as they could. They just didn't have the right environmental controls to ensure that it was done sustainably, to have balance.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's what's happened then. So, but recently, like, and we've grown from that. So farmers now do look after their land. They understand, like, they understand if you don't look after your soil, if you don't have a balance and have biodiversity
You
on you,
go broke.
you're not going to be around. So
Yeah.
we've gone past that. So we're some of the best farmers in the world on the driest continent in the world. So, but what we've seen now is state governments introducing legislation like the Vegetation Management Act, which there's so much different vegetation in Queensland. They have a one act fits all. So a landowner that clears a tree called mulga out at Charleville to feed starving stock, and it grows.
Mm-hmm.
It grows very quickly and regenerates, and it likes being cleared. They're treated the same as someone here that, like, I can't go and clear, which is good, steep country. So it's actually making it harder for a poor guy out there who's trying to drought feed his stock. And that kind of vegetation likes to be cleared. It regenerates. It doesn't hurt it.
And he's not allowed to.
Yeah, that's right. But there's so many changes. Like that Vegetation Management Act, like the mapping that's behind it, is you've got to keep up to date with the mapping. It can change. There's been something like 70 or 80 changes. Like you have a look at a map, you get on the computer, have a look at your map of your property and the different coding. It's like looking through a kaleidoscope of colours. And some
like
land,
a topographical map where it's two-dimensional, but you can see that,
you can clear here, you can't clear here, you can only clear certain amounts here, and that constantly changes. And landholders are
and
actually
it's your responsibility to keep up.
And a lot of it's wrong. A lot of the mapping is wrong because they don't ground truth it. It doesn't get ground truth. They've had mapping here where they've gone to the middle of Brisbane, Suncorp Stadium, and they've put a dot there saying that's high diversity value there. I know this. So this is because there's a complete separation, or there has been, between the people that live and work on the land and the people making policy for the government in the city, and it needs to come together. But it's been separated. So I think we need to rejoin that, so you get a lot better policy coming out, and to protect the environment, but to protect farmers' rights and livelihoods so they're more sustainable. Because remember, We've got to look after the environment, but we've got a growing population. We've got to produce food, mate, for a growing population around the world. And Australia does that very well, but there's a lot more potential.
But isn't libertarianism, doesn't that answer that? Doesn't capitalism answer that anyway? Like you said, it's like you don't want to rip the guts out of your land this season for a bumper crop if it's going to cost you the next 5 years or, for the rest of time. So you need to produce responsibly and sustainably to at least a certain extent. And what the hell would the bureaucrats sitting in Brisbane know about it?
Well, that's the scary thing. They're taking their direction from international non-government organisations or activist
There we
groups
go. Yeah.
that want farming gone, mate. And so then you get these perverse policies that have worse outcomes and really puts farmers up against the wall. And that's why there's a lot of the younger generations that don't want to be in farming in Australia.
No, of course not.
Look, just for me to roll a single beef cow out of my gate, there's 77 different pieces of state legislation and codes of practice that I've got to abide by. To grow
and the cow's checking,
dog,
like the cow goes through the forms, with a pen in its hoof just to make sure that you've checked all the boxes.
But that's the burden that farmers are under, the bureaucratic burden, mate. We are getting strangled by it. We are getting steamrolled by it. Hey, so it's
just getting worse. Yeah, it's been going like this for years and years.
It has,
and years.
And it's since probably in the last 10 years it's really ramped up as where these far left governments have really got their systems work out to how to circumvent good community consultation and what's right and proper and decent. They've worked out the streamlined approach, and we're really feeling the impact of it now. That's what's happening.
But what's the argument? These NGOs that are pimping these, I don't satanic, just insane policy. What's the argument?
The argument's saying that farming isn't sustainable. We're not using sustainable practices, which obviously there's many in the scientific community that are against that. That, again, they want it all treed. They want all – they would look at Australia and want it as a big national park with all trees in it. That basically that's what they're heading to. They think animal agricultural is cruel, that we shouldn't eat meat, that we shouldn't run cows on pasture, that we shouldn't but it's all right to grow crops, Damon. It's all right to rip up a field and grow.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and with petrochemical fertilizers because we don't have any cattle or anything else to actually fertilize the soil. I
love coming up against these green groups and like these activist groups and saying, oh, well, you know, with cattle farming, you're just destroying so much biodiversity. I'll go, well, how's that? My cow's in a paddock with trees, with forest. I said, when you look at a broad acre field, like they plough the land, mate. And what do you think's there? There's heaps of biodiversity. There's heaps of native mice, insects, lizards. And, you know, it's just each argument is different. And I don't want to play off one side of agriculture against the other. It is just ridiculous. It's about getting better at farming, making sure that we have the best knowledge and use of our natural resources, because there is always going to be an impact, but how we manage that impact so we can keep on sustainably farming forever. And I think Australians are some of the best in the world at adopting those practices, mate, because we have very little rainfall. We don't get hardly any subsidies, no subsidies, and we operate on the open market where unfortunately we're price takers. All the time we're price takers. So we've got to be very efficient in how we farm. And I think, you know, we've had activists turn up to farms and gate crash farms and walk into feedlots and saying that they're cruel, go in there illegally and trespass. And the government has let them do that.
It doesn't do anything.
Well, afterwards they, you know, say it's bad, and there has been laws brought in slowly, but they've let the impact go out there, cause a lot of stress, and that in itself carries on. Like, you know, geez, there's activists around, where are they going to go? the government just gives them a slap on the wrist, a misdemeanor. And so rural communities, plus what you've got to think about too is our road networks are falling to bits. The maintenance of the road networks in rural and regional Queensland are disgusting. You've got trucks that carry heaps of beef to market that have got to take the long way around because the main road can't sustain the weight. It's falling to bits. You've got a lot of the key services that you take for granted in cities, like doctors, like childcare centres. We've got a new hospital here at Kingaroy. It cost $1 million. It's got flash. It's a very flash building with solar panels. But guess what? There's no staff in it, Damon, because we haven't even got the housing to put the staff in. It's just so what you can see is the decay of rural and regional Australia because the governments are so focused on building empires in the city.
But this is sorry, it's terrifying because I mean these are the people who feed the entire country. They feed the nation. They feed people all over the world. You shut this down, and it's another one of those cases of it doesn't come back. You don't just move some city slickers who have gone to university onto a farm, and all of a sudden it goes back to full production again. I mean, I wouldn't have a clue where to start. I'm not saying I'm representative or particularly intelligent, but just I'm going as a person who's lived in the city. You just wouldn't have a clue, and I'm probably better than many because I was born in New Zealand. So we went on excursions to farms and we got the chance to shear the sheep and to milk the cow. And most of the kids wouldn't have even done that. And just the idea that they're treating you guys as the enemy and shutting you down comes back to the question of why? Because we see the same thing with the arguments in Europe where they're talking about this nonsense with the methane and wanting to now medicate the cows so that they produce less. It just biblically stupid ideas. And that's the thing. You're in the heart of this. It's just, what's the argument? I mean, it's so insane. Surely there's got to be a way out of this. Surely there's got to be some sense somewhere, or someone's being paid off in a big fat way.
It is.
Because it just doesn't begin to make sense.
It doesn't begin to make sense. And I think the federal government has signed off on a number of treaties that, and some of them aren't even treaties, agreements, international agreements that don't go through Parliament to be reviewed and to be signed off. And those really lock us into certain things that then are adopted by the bureaucracy at a federal and state level and make it even more difficult for farming because it's about environmental protection at all costs. It's not looking at sustainable natural resource management, which we produce food, have sustainable food production systems, but we also look after the environment. They're just total environment, no farming. I've met senior public servants. I've met senior public servants of, and this was a number of years ago when we had a full-on. Well, we've just come out of a socialist regime that have said, and they were in a department that was supposed to be helping primary production and farmers produce food. And this person said to me, he said, I'd be quite happy if we had to import food from overseas, from China, if it meant saving the environment in Australia.
It's just delusional. But that's the thing. It's like COVID, where it's just this. There's a vested interest here. I mean, these ideas that these people are, verbalizing aren't their own. They're too stupid. It's, you're obviously regurgitating policy given to you by somebody else. I don't know who it is, but it's there's too many people in too many places saying exactly the same thing that makes absolutely no sense, that you go, it's not just that it was a coincidence that all the stupid people came up with the same stupid idea at the same time. This is infinitely stupid. So it's like you've got every possible level of stupid that you can choose from. What's the chance that you come up with the same stupid idea everywhere?
Well, what's happened is because we've had successive regimes of socialist governments and they've really looked at green ideology, they've taken a lot of extension resources back to, say, that used to help farming communities adopt more sustainable practices and work with. You have field days, you go and you learn more about new technologies to adopt to improve the way your production and environmental management. They've limited that and taken those officers away that used to meet face to face to have true engagement with farming groups, and they've replaced them with more compliance officers. So you've now got tree police, hordes of them. You've now got reef police, which come around and they track your property. My property's flown over with a satellite. They can measure the ground cover. So at the end of September each year, I'm supposed to have a minimum of 55% ground cover. And so if I haven't, so if I'm in drought or something like that, or that ground cover can be a noxious weed that's deadly to the environment, it doesn't matter. All they want is ground cover to minimise erosion. 55%. So I can get a knock on the door. Tree police, reef police, they can come on. I've got to have specific records, which I do, of any chemical I've used, which you should anyway, where you moved your cows, what reason have I got to have that bare country there? And I can say, well, it's drought. And they say, well, it's not really drought. And so that you can imagine farming communities, which they did a couple of years ago. Queensland was in severe drought. And here you go. You've had these reef police come out and just sit down with the landholder and go, mate, we want to see all your records. And the landholder is out feeding stock because of the drought. And so you can imagine the pressure, the mental anguish. And so that's a real element in government that's putting pressure on people and it's affecting their mental health. One of the key things because farmers have one of the highest rates of suicide, is the overburden of regulation and red tape, mate. And they're pushing this. They're taking away the support that landowners need to work in small groups and one-on-one with extension services that help them become better farmers. And they're just using the big stick. If you don't do what you say, we're going to come and whack you. And some of these fines are hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, this is ridiculous.
Sure, a struggling farmer in a drought. Nice work.
This is ridiculous. Like if I want and go and plant a crop, and I could plough up my whole farm here, 800 acres. I could go and plough it all up, and I wouldn't need to go and get a permit from the government if I was all that crop I used on farm for my own cows to feed them. Yeah, but if I wanted to sell that crop, I would have to go and get a permit. How's that work?
And that means an application, and that means justification,
thousands and
means
thousands
analysis,
of dollars.
that means money and time that you just.
Well, I can grow hay on my property to feed my own cows. I don't need a permit because I'm feeding my own stock. But if I say,
you can't sell to the farmer next door who needs the extra hay.
Yeah, if I've got an overburden of oversupply of hay, I leave some in the shed and go to sell that. Well, I should apply for a permit.
And now they've got a satellite going over your head to spy on you to see whether or not you're actually doing that as well.
Yeah, it builds a lot of trust, doesn't it?
The Hunger Games. It
is the Hunger Games, mate. We're in it.
Mate, you're trained as a scientist and you were in there getting awards left, right and centre for policy in government for many, many years. So you've been in the actual guts of the machine. So from having seen things from the inside, how do these correlate with what you're experiencing on the outside and other people are seeing? Is this, like, as a person who hasn't been inside government and doesn't want to and hates just interfacing with it, can you understand what's going on from having been in the inside?
The public service and government has changed so much since I was there. It's hardly recognisable when I was in at a high level inside the beast. I remember sitting down with the top senior bureaucrat in my department, and he had a meeting with me, and he said, Jim, there's going to be some changes, and this is in 2001. There's going to be some changes in how we act. This department actually provides services to the people of Queensland, and he said, we're going to go from a service delivery model, extension, working with people, bringing them along, educating them, collaborative approach, to more of a compliance, legislative, and key strategy approach.
Authoritarian.
And I said, oh, all right. And being like,
and it was a deliberate, stated, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go from working with them to tell them what to do.
Yeah, I came from that background where I really loved. That's why I joined the public service. We were out there helping landowners. And like with the locust plagues, the mice plagues, big weed and feral animal management projects to protect the environment. But so going from that, where we were going to step away from that and start to go compliance and red tape, I thought to myself, well, I don't want to be here anymore at this high level. This is not what I signed up for, to be a red tape and compliance bureaucrat, mate. I'm out of here. And then so leaving.
But what was the justification? Why?
Exactly. They, mate, to this day, that is just crystal clear in my head. Sitting down like I did, a senior bureaucrat, the top guy in the department saying that to me, and I just went, wow. And so I stuck around for another 18 months, and thought, well,
and you saw the change. You saw it happen.
Oh, yeah. I saw services pull back, and I saw more compliance and regulation start to build. And then I've seen it over the last 2 decades now build and build and build to a point where all these things I've talked about that are affecting us in our everyday lives has come to be. And I just find it, and that is what driven me to become, like lead all these rallies, to start Let's Rethink Renewables, to get on Property Rights Australia, because I'm so frustrated at the bureaucracy and government for going in this direction, because you get more with collaboration than compliance.
Of course. Yeah, everyone wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I find it very frustrating, but you see it everywhere. Look, in Canberra this year, there's 106,000 federal public servants, and their only job is to enforcement compliance. 106,000 of them, Damon. And no wonder that we're just being oppressed. We're just being grind into the dirt. And then on top of that, you've got all the renewables. You can see they keep pounding it into us. And it's starting to fracture. People, a lot of rural towns are
It's not sustainable.
It's not. They're destroying us. That's what they're doing in Australia.
But the collapse is genuinely terrifying, because I mean, you're talking about the people who feed you, and
that's right. That's what's happening.
No society's gone very long without food before things get really, really freaking ugly, and that's well known. It's known in military circles. If you want to overthrow a government, just make the people hungry for a few days. Like you've got the big corporate farms, Damon, that can survive all the regulation and red tape because they're big, they're massive, they can do it. And it's the small family farming units, the small to medium term family, and the tiny ones that do it part time, which the collective mass of them is bigger than the corporates anyway. They're the ones that are collapsing, and that make up the integrity of the so was it who was the administration that came in when that was there a changed administration in Australia at the time that policy change happened, or it was midterm?
It was midterm, and it was Labor ever since that point. It was just about midterm of Labor, and then it was Labor from then on. We've had 25 years since then, 24 years of it. So
all these. Then the other thing that you just said about was the big farms. Is that what has been taking over? They've been buying up all the littles and just swallowing them up. But who's doing the work still? Like, is their farming still going, or is the production actually dropping off in Australia?
No, look, the farming is still, and that's how good of farming that we are. That it's still quite good, but could be a lot better. We're definitely below what we could be. And what's
Yeah.
happening is that you ask any farmer or business that support farmers, you can't get staff. There's no younger generations coming through. Off the top of my head, the average age of a farmer is well past 65 years old. Once those farmers
I've read
go,
this stuff. It's past retirement age. Yeah,
yeah,
and
so
those skills are
that's where there'll be a
rapidly just
collapse.
yeah.
And you haven't got, they've closed down, cop this, they've closed down a lot of agricultural colleges that used to train young people to get them ready to go into a farming future. They've closed them down because, and they were great facilities, one at Longreach, one at Emerald, and they used to, stations used to go there and just offer employment to these people. But because the government said they weren't earning enough money, we'll have to sell those assets. And that happened under a Labor
You're
government.
joking.
So they're gone. They're gone. So you can see that's another whole pillar that they've taken out of the food production system to educate and stimulate the next generations to buy into the agricultural sector.
Absolutely, yeah, because you've taken the opportunity away. So the few that might have been interested don't even have the option anymore. So they become DEI agents or something like that, HR.
Well,
instead.
And agricultural education, there's not many schools that, even in these rural areas, that actually teach it as a subject anymore. They'd rather teach feeling ashamed of being Australian and how we're a bunch of colonials that invaded. So they'd rather teach that or climate change theory rather than actually let's grow food for ourselves.
Yeah, let's feed ourselves so we can survive another generation.
Yeah, it's
so
it
was interesting going back into your previous life, reading about the locust plague that you avoided. The story that immediately came to my mind was Mao, communist Mao from China, with the with the Great Famine that was engineered with the killing of the sparrows and the rest of the awful policies that a socialist government put in place again. And here's a man who actually prevented the locusts from ever actually reaching that level of destruction. How did that come about? Can you, because that was awarded and all the rest of it. What did you do?
Well,
this is the time when government was doing good stuff, yeah?
I was based in a small outback town called Blackall at the time, and I applied for a job in Emerald in central Queensland, a massive cropping area, very rich. It had a lot of coal mines too, but very rich, fertile country. And
I've been to Emerald, yeah. Like I said, I lived in Queensland. I've driven through it a few times. My parents go there regularly, yeah.
So I got involved with a bit of locust, small-scale outbreaks of swarms. See, the thing with locusts, there's a number of different species. They can duplicate and multiply sevenfold between each generation. So if you start off with, say, 100 hectares of flying insects, locusts, if you let them lay eggs and go to the next generation, well, that'll be 700.
7 hectares.
Yeah, and then you can imagine if you've got 10,000 hectares and then you multiply, and that's how plagues develop. So the whole thing is jump on them quick, jump on them early and go hard. And that's what we did. But there was such good conditions. We had to go very hard, and because the way you treat locusts, the way you find them is to fly below power line level in a helicopter. And it's the beat of the chopper blades that make them fly. And so that's how you find you get a number of targets, and you go and spray them with an insecticide, but very minute amounts. But we actually were the first group to actually trial organic in fungus called metarhizium. So we trialed that as well. So we actually sprayed 160,000 hectares of swarm in 3.5 months, mate. That's how many. And some of those swarms, the biggest swarm I've sprayed, that you can see it on the horizon. In a distance, you're flying along at a helicopter and you could be out 1,000 feet. And when it's hot, that's where that gives them energy and they fly. They get really active. and it's just like this black
Right. Yeah.
swarm, 4 k's long and a k thick, with the insect density
Wow.
of 90 to 100 adults, and so the sky turns black pink and swirls around like that, and you go right, and they can fly at 60 knots, which is very, they're bloody quick. And so you fly around them, you bring the spray plane in, and they do a big race course pattern, because when you start to spray locusts, they actually move en masse and try and get away. And so the spray plane comes and does a gate, and they
Circles
fly
them.
into it. Yeah. So that's it. They can fly 700-800 kilometres in a night, get up, and they can land. I've seen 1,000 hectares of wheat. Of sorghum. We ran out of light. We couldn't find any. We couldn't fly anymore. So we said we'd come back tomorrow. Locusts had come in overnight, and by the time we got back there in the morning, the whole lot was gone. It was like bare, with a few stalks sticking up.
Holy crap! Wow.
Well, you see, all that biosecurity response, because we've gone away from the service delivery model to compliance and enforcement, a lot of that intellect and on-ground capability in state and federal government has gone, and it's gone out the door. And so we are in a precarious position where we haven't got the capabilities that we did 20, 25 years ago to mount a response to a plague locust situation. It would be, on a state basis, we'd be scrabbling. And the same goes for, and this is what should worry people, is that because our biosecurity response capacity has been withdrawn from government and reversed and let go, that if there was an exotic disease outbreak in Australia, say we've had foot and mouth that came in and got into the wild pig population, mate, last estimates, there's over 20 million feral pigs in Australia. There's 5 or 6 million. I've got them here on my place, and they, with something like foot and mouth, they carry it. They are an amplifier of it. So once it gets into the feral pig population, you will never be able to stop it. And so our whole agricultural industry for meat production would be decimated. 56 billion, I think they've estimated it would cost over a 10-year period. It collapses. Australia's economy would collapse. But here we are. We haven't even tested our arm since COVID.
Oh, that's just ridiculous.
I say this about Australia: we're the best at bureaucracy in the world. There's these big national plans, response plans, but they haven't tested it with local communities and local government, who they're going to have to work with in a response situation like that. But we've got these great plans there, Damon. Look at them. Look at this big plan.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't action them. Like we're the gold medalists at bureaucracy, Australia, but we've lost the capacity for on-ground action collectively.
Well, that kind of comes back into libertarianism then. Why does government need to do this? Why couldn't a collective, it's in every interest of every farmer in the region that a plague doesn't strike, because the locusts aren't, that's Bob's, we'll leave his alone and we'll go and eat Charlie's.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
and that's why libertarianism appeals to me, because you can see that having something that's paid for by a cooperative for farmers or communities that's not attached to government would be way more, I guess, efficient and streamlined to mount a response. Government would still play a role in coordination across a number of different departments, but I think cooperatives and that there's so much less waste, and it's all about rapid response, knowing what's on the ground, and good community networks. None of those things government have anymore. Yeah, no, government has lost that.
But the people funding the cooperative know what needs to be done as well, so they'd be able to just go, that policy's garbage. We're not doing it.
That's right. I am disappointed like we have industry groups that are supposed to represent us, and that in some respects they do an average job of putting issues up, but they're captured by the government because they receive funding from the government.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
always the
they
thing.
prattle the government policy, and some are even openly supporting this renewable rollout when you've got all these groups saying, what are you doing? They're saying, oh, no, it's great. There's heaps of opportunities. And people are just like starting to really see that, well, you don't represent us, man. What are you doing? You're just a government, you know, you're a quasi-government
Yeah, you're just
organisation.
another agency, but you're another tax on
Yeah,
us. Yeah.
that's right. And the bigger landholders, there's a lot of, in some of the big corporates, there's a lot of elitism. So they want the little guys to disappear, the family farms, the medium type producers, so they get free reign.
I would have thought so. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they always side on the government too, saying, well, I think it's a great idea. Yeah, we should be doing this. And so they also, yeah, they work hard against like smaller holdings and medium-sized holdings because they see them as direct competition. There's no unity.
Then, so where you go from here is what you're doing. It's basically the grassroots stuff of just trying to inform the public, get in the papers, enter Parliament, and push forward ideas. It sounds tough. What could other people do? Because I mean, this obviously is going to affect everybody in society.
It is, and I think that the main thing is we need to. Surprisingly, what I've found out, and have been presently surprised, there is still a number of people in urban areas and major metropolitan areas that still value farming and still want to support farming. They see farmers as very honest, hard-working people. And when you've got a picture of a farmer and a young family working the fields, and then you've got a picture of a bureaucrat or a lifelong politician, they go to the farmer. Trust is there because they produce things. They
Well, I
produce
feel
food.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think we've got to get better at marketing ourselves. We've got to get more connectivity with urban people. But a lot of it's geared that way that makes it very hard, Damon, where there's a lot of media outlets and that are beholden to corporations that also have the ideology that farming needs to really, family farms need to disappear. We've got to really plant more trees. Farming's bad for the environment. And so you're up against it. There's always a slant against, they're branding us as environmental vandals, but then we all see the tops of mountains being blown off and they're saying, well, they don't report on it. There has been very little reports until probably the last 4 to 5 months.
How do you mean the tops of mountains?
Well, when they actually dynamite off the tops of mountains to place these big wind pads there, these pads for these big windmills. Here's a funny story. Like this, remember I talked about reef compliance, and you got these reef officers. Well, this guy that I know doesn't live this far from here. He had a quarry, and he dug a quarry of 1 acre into a side of a hill, so he could access gravel to do his roads to stop erosion, so he could drive over them when it was wet. Anyway, satellite went over, he had a knock on the door from the tree police, and they said, mate, what are you doing? Look, we've gone over here. You can't just do a quarry here on your own land to put gravel on your roads. And he says, well,
how dare you? Yeah.
He said he pointed to the range, about 10 k's. You could see the range, and he said, can you see what they're doing to that mountain range over there? Going, oh, yeah, well, that's a wind farm. He said, why aren't you going seeing them? They're blowing the tops off the mountains. They're putting in 1,000 kilometres of tracks. And they said, well, that's different. We haven't got any authority to stop them. But we've got
permits for that. They've got a piece of paper.
They're exempt. It's community benefit. What you're doing, you're just a dirty farmer.
Yeah. Driving on your own land. How dare you?
Geez, using your own gravel. So there's just some ridiculous things like that. I think the farming community, like they've been beaten, but there is starting to be some unity. People are waking up. And I think what this What this renewable rollout has done is galvanise people to become more politically active, Damon. And I think
Yeah, good.
that's why they're attractive to parties like the Libertarians and a number of other politicians that are from the grassroots, that aren't full of party elites and their army of minions, that they're actually from grassroots. They've been farmers or from primary industries or miners themselves, and they've got skin in the game. And
Yeah.
they're the kind of people that we want to get into Parliament, so we can bring back some common sense, because there is no common sense at the moment. If we
Not
really
even,
think,
no.
mate, just the whole climate change argument. Like I say to people, I don't believe in man-made climate change, but the climate, I believe, is always changing and is going to continue to change. Shouldn't we be doing what we've always practiced, is climate adaptation? So we go and make adjustments to it to adapt to a changing climate, like we always have, and to make sure we can still produce food no matter what the climatic conditions, and we can still look after our biodiversity without destroying our economy. Makes sense.
Yeah, I don't even, I won't even get started on the environmental thing. It's just always been another one of these.
It is.
It's just, it's based on fallacious arguments and just lies, essentially, with obvious vested interests again. And it's just sort of like, oh, right. So basically, the same people who have just lied to me my whole life and all throughout history to every population have come up with another solution that they're going to impose upon the people that happens to require a multi-trillion-dollar trading scheme for an invisible gas that you can't actually measure based on estimates that they provide. Like, yeah, nothing about that sounds at all dodgy, or yeah, it's not even a case of or one of the arguments I've had as well is just like, human beings causing massive environmental damage. Like, yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
they've always got those pictures of those factory smokestacks with all of the horrible black and brown gunk coming out of it. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
that's not CO2 because you can't see CO2.
Yeah.
So what the hell is the CO2? Why are you showing me a photo of some other pollutant and then telling me CO2 is the problem? Because there's some CO2.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do?
Ridiculous, mate.
It's asinine. It's just so utterly ridiculous. But
What I'm finding
I mean,
is, yeah, go.
no, please.
What I'm finding is, like, my interaction more on the urban interface as well, is that people are suffering the same thing. They feel voiceless and forgotten as well. Like, their property rights are being taken away from them as well. People are now, like, look at the Gold Coast, where they're looking at charging them a viewing tax. The higher you go in a skyscraper high rise, the more tax you
Oh, get
pay.
out.
So that's just on the Gold Coast. The amount of regulations in planning at a state level and local government level is just stifling how the development of people's property rights in urban areas. So it just makes it so hard to
Yeah.
split blocks, develop blocks, to build a house. The amount of different like legislation and red tape people have to go through to actually get it through council, through their planning scheme. But the thing that's coming recently again with climate change is the new National Building Code. Now you've got to have your house built to a climate change standard where it adds
Oh,
roughly
yeah.
about 30% to a build, or even more, where you're only allowed to have a certain amount of
30%.
light. Yes.
Jesus.
Yep. 30%.
30%.
Yeah, and it's all about like equality. So you've got to have ramps, you've got to have doorways that you can fit
Oh, yeah.
wheelchairs through, all this other stuff as well. You've got to have over the top insulation. So all that wraps up, like, as if building a house isn't hard enough and the cost isn't high enough. You've got all these extra additional things that have been added into the National Construction Code, which each state has to follow. that makes
But
it
so these
harder
were,
and harder.
that sounds like those were commercial constraints previously. They're now applying them to domestic as well, where you,
Oh yeah, for sure. Yep, definitely. Yeah, yeah. I've got a mate in town that's building a new house, and he said, yeah, it's 30%. He said it's just ridiculous, ridiculous. Ah, so all this, you can see how people, and the lack of consultation, like where they put through major highways or transmission lines in urban areas, and that it's just the way they treat people in communicating what governments are thinking of doing. They keep them in the dark, or the way they consult
mm,
with them is very like, do a survey or only have one meeting, or put information out just before the Christmas break. Oh, you didn't see that information? Oh, well, that's a shame. So all these sneaky little
or
tricks.
yeah, yeah, or they put through a bill in Parliament that's called the, ending paper cuts bill. It sounds
Yeah,
like the most innocuous thing in the world, except it happens to be 5,000 pages of legislation. It's tabled half an hour before it's voted upon,
yeah.
and after the fact, you find out, oh, didn't you hear about that new legislation that was in the paper cuts
that's
bill?
that's
You know,
right. They add all these other bits of amendments
it's
to
all
actually make.
hidden on page
Yeah,
3,784, third paragraph, one
that's right.
line. There's going to be a new administration that's going to police all of this sort of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you're seeing it all over the world now. The environmental stuff, I know that from the UN down, and it came into the what were they? I think it was tied in with the Trans-Pacific Partnership and those treaties that Obama was trying to bring through. And in that, it included, from my understanding anyway, um, requirements whereby there was going to be essentially a global environmental police force that could enter anybody's house who was signed up to this at any point in time and check that you were up to date with all of the latest environmental requirements and legislation as of that minute that they entered your house, and were able to evict you if you weren't until it was actually improved. So if they changed the law on your gas stove like they're trying to do,
yeah,
then they would walk into your house and go, that's a gas stove, that's illegal, get out. You can come back when you've actually, had that replaced and filled in the forms, and we've approved that you no longer have a gas stove, and literally kick people out of their properties. And this is regulation that's been tabled, discussed, debated in secret behind our backs,
yeah.
that these people, they actually talk about like it's reasonable. And it's like, how can there be any other alternative than a libertarian party? Just bugger off, all of you. Leave us the hell alone. Um,
It's like the
you
term.
know,
Yeah, it's like democratic backsliding. Have you heard that term, where they actually use democratic processes to be undemocratic? Rush things
yeah,
through.
yeah,
They've got the power. It's not really what they should be doing, but they've got the power to do it, and so they do it. And that's what we see them doing more and more, locking out true consultation and input from people. And government knows best. You know, you voted us in to look after you, which we did, but we voted you in to do our bidding, mate. You work for us. You should be
yeah,
interacting with us as we go along, as you develop stuff, not as it comes down from the top. We're all seeing policy development for the last couple of decades top down. There's been no bottom up. And so, of course, policies aren't going to work when they've developed an isolation from the people that they're going to be impacted upon or put upon. It doesn't make sense. To me, it is, that's so unlibertarian. Like, it just needs to stop. And that's what drives me to get into government. I don't want to be a politician, mate. I'd rather still do consultancy for biosecurity, play cow farmer. But it's just that what we see Australia turning into, and how they're treating people in urban areas and rural and regional areas. I just think it's so un-Australian. And like you said, it's happening all around the world. I think
yeah.
the natural choice is libertarian. I think most people um, that I speak to now, and I do speak to a lot of people on the campaign trail, there is traits of libertarianism in most people, because like
Yeah.
uh, it's not left or
But that's
right,
the
is
thing,
it?
is that Yeah, even I spoke to Canelm about this, that I've seen interviews, on YouTube where you have somebody goes to a university and interviews the students there, and they're proclaimed Marxist socialists, and capitalism is the root of all evil. And the reason that they have that belief is because everybody should be free to make their own choices for their own lives and to start a business and work in whatever they want to and all the rest. And you're like, that's not Marxist socialism. That's libertarianism. And everything that they describe is just sort of like, you're free to compete with other people and just live a free life where you're left alone to do what you want to do as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. And you're like, that's literally the definition of libertarianism,
Libertarians,
not
yeah,
socialism. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. And all these problems that you're talking about, they're not capitalism. They're the socialism that's infused and infested our Western liberal democracies, and at the expense of the liberalism. It's
It is. That's
yeah,
right.
I agree. I think pretty much everybody in Western society wants and believes in the principles of libertarianism, but they've been misled into thinking that it's labeled something else and voting for those people who pretend to be offering the same solution. It's, yeah, quite incredible.
It is. I think we're on the
But,
cusp of a big change. It could take, or let's hope it happens quickly. But you can feel that people want change. That they're not
oh
happy
yeah, yeah,
with, we're spiraling down. Our quality of life is spiraling down, and they want to change, and they just feel oppressed from the government in every aspect of their lives, and they want to push back against that. And that's what freedom is: to give you space to breathe, to so you're responsible, you're self-reliant. You don't need government in every aspect of our lives, and we can get on with looking after ourselves, mate. Doing deals with each
yeah.
other, trade, libertarianism. And I think people are to that point now, but it's just educating people. It's talking to them and talking them around face to face, like you and I are doing, like through this mechanism here. But I mean, the more you do that, the more the light comes on. They go, yeah, no, that's
But the
exactly,
more,
no, that's
yeah,
exactly. I
the,
was
the
I
more
was
people
waiting
find
in
they
the,
actually have.
yeah, I was waiting in the car
I was going
lounge
to
today.
say,
I was getting our vehicle serviced, and I was sitting down with the guys, and they were just talking. I said, "Oh, how you going?" He goes, "Yeah, good." He says, "Oh, I'm just so sick of just waiting for my car. There's all these different forms you got." I said, "Oh, just red tape." He goes, "Geez, I'm sick of red tape." I said,
yeah,
"Bureaucracy." He goes, "It's just out." And then bang, we were off. Hey. And I said, "Have you heard of the libertarians?" You thought, "The libertarians?" No. I said, "We're going to get rid of red tape and government intervention." He goes, "That sounds
sign me
like the
up.
party." Yeah, yeah, bing, bing. The light comes on. So it's about our ability to reach as many people as possible in each election cycle. It's
Just
hampered
spread
by the powers, but we can do our best to turn that wheel and get the momentum up as much as we can.
spread the word and let the good idea sell itself. Just,
That's right, mate. That's what we're going
I
to
think
do.
that's a great place to end, mate. Thank you very, very much for that.
No worries, mate.
And no, genuinely, and I certainly hope you can kick some goals for us in the Senate when you finally get there.
I'll do my very best, mate, and I'll make sure that I'll stand up for everyday people.
I know you will. Thanks again.